Anya began to pant and sweat heavily under her dense layer of reindeer fur. The air was sharp in her lungs. The howls were getting closer and becoming more frequent. But what scared her more was that she couldn't hear the people any longer. Siberia, home of ice, tundra, and wolves. This story takes place along the frozen shores of the Yana River in deepest Siberia. It's a desperate and freezing land, with temperatures reaching as low as minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit in January, one of the coldest places in the world. In this bleak environment, all animals must go to extreme lengths to survive, but one creature in particular is more deadly than the rest: the gray wolf. Fabled throughout Europe as the stalker of woods and eater of children. But if you thought the gray wolf's bloody reputation was just a story, you were wrong. In the winter of 2012, the unthinkable happened. 13 January 2012, near the town of Verkhayansk, Sakha Republic, Russia. Anya, a member of the Yakut tribe, was walking back to town after tending her herd. Like many people in this region, she kept reindeer. In Siberia, it's quite normal for women to be in charge of ranches on their own, because the men are very often away working in the cities. As Anya walked back to the village along the hard-packed snow of the path, she heard a sound that sent fear through her bones, the howl of wolves echoing across the trees. It was daylight, but Anya knew that wouldn't stop them. She stood on the lonely forest, feeling the cold all around her, transfixed with dread. What should she do? Run for the village? Or return to her precious reindeer? She cursed under her breath. Wolves had always been a problem in Siberia, but it had never been this bad. Usually, they ate smaller animals, hares or rabbits, but this year, the winter had been worse than ever, and the lack of food had driven the wolves to behave in crazy ways. It was said that the extreme cold had led them to form a super pack of 400 wolves. Over the past few months, ranchers had lost hundreds of horses and thousands of reindeer. This super pack was insatiable. If they attacked even a small number of Anya's herd, it could destroy her livelihood. It wouldn't be the wolves that starved, it would be her. There was another howl, louder than before, with many voices, dozens, maybe hundreds of wolves. Anya gasped, imagining the white tundra swarming with black, fur-covered bodies. Suddenly, she heard something else, a sound that curdled her blood and brought sharp goosebumps to her freezing skin. It was the sound of people screaming. It came from somewhere deep in the woods. Anya gazed into the murky forest. Nothing but shadows moved among the barren branches of pine and spruce trees. Anya had a younger brother, Dimitri, who worked as a local guide for tourists who came to see the northern lights. She knew he was out with a group today. She realized she was trembling, and she couldn't tell if it was the cold or the fear that did it. Anya heard the screams again, followed by an ear-splitting cacophony of howls. Without thinking, she ran. Against every instinct in her body, she headed toward the wolves. Her brother could be out there. She had to help. The snow was thick. It was like running through mud. Anya began to pant and sweat heavily under her dense layer of reindeer fur. The air was sharp in her lungs. The howls were getting closer and becoming more frequent. But what scared her more was that she couldn't hear the people any longer. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, she came over a ridge, and there before her was a clearing in the forest. It was a terrible sight. Wolves, hundreds of wolves, and in the center of the clearing, a tiny cluster of terrified figures. It was a group of maybe 10 or 12, all dressed like hikers in thick European coats. all apart from one who was dressed in furs like her. "Dimitri!" screamed Anya. She tried to count the wolves, but there were too many, and more arriving from the other side of the woods. So far, they hadn't attacked. They were sticking to the trees, circling the hikers, but it was only a matter of time. Anya wasn't about to stand back and watch. She had her father's old war rifle on her back and a hunting knife on her belt. Quickly, she unslung her rifle and began to load, calling to her brother. But it was no use. The wolves were snarling and howling so loud that her voice couldn't be heard. Suddenly, a huge black shape came out of the trees toward her. It was bigger than any dog she'd ever seen, and its eyes were starving. She knew this wolf would kill her if it could. If Anya thought she was scared before, now she was petrified. She tried to make her hands move faster, but her fingers were numb with cold. She fiddled with the bullets. Faster, faster. She could hear the wolf's paws pounding the snow as it rushed toward her. At the very last moment, she got the gun loaded and turned the barrel to the charging beast. Bang! The wolf fell down on the snow, dead. A rush of relief flooded through Anya, relief and adrenaline. She felt invincible for a moment. Then she remembered she only had a handful of bullets, and there were hundreds of wolves moving all around her in the shadows. Luckily, her brother had heard the sound of the shot. He turned and he called to her. She saw that he had a rifle as well. Good. 2 guns are better than 1. He ran up the ridge toward her, leading the hikers in front of him. Many of them were slow and faltering. They had heavy backpacks made for long walks, totally unsuitable in this terrain. One of the hikers desperately pulled off their backpack and threw it into the mass of snarling beasts. The wolves tore the bag to shreds. Clothes and maps spilled out everywhere. Anya heard the ripping as the pages of a map were torn from its spine. It was a terrible sound. Her brother was at the back of the group, waiting for the hikers to finish climbing the ridge. Anya watched him load his rifle and aim into the mass of wolves. He fired twice. 2 of the beasts fell down dead. Dimitri was a good shot. The first of the hikers, a sweaty European with a sunburned face, had just reached her. She pulled him up the slope and continued on. The rest of the hikers moved past her. Suddenly, her brother seemed to stumble in the snow. He flung his arms out as he fell, and the gun flew from his hands. He let out one long, desperate shout when he hit the ground. "Anya!" The wolves heard it, and with blood-curdling speed rushed toward him. There was nothing she could do. Again and again she fired her gun into the wall of bodies, but it was no good. The space where Dimitri had been was now a teeming mass of fur and teeth. Anya thought she saw blood on their muzzles. "Not Dimitri, not him, please." One of the hikers was yanking on her sleeve and pointing frantically at the trees all around. She couldn't understand his language, but she knew he was asking her, which way to safety? With great effort, she tore herself from the terrible sight and started off through the woods. They moved with what felt like dreadful slowness through the forest. As they ran, Anya kept firing shots at the wolves. She wasn't sure how many she killed, but it wasn't enough. Above them, the sun began to drop, and out of the darkness, Anya half noticed the sky was alive with beautiful, mesmerizing patterns of the aurora borealis. 5 of the hikers fell in the snow. Every time it happened, Anya moved desperately to save them, but it was impossible. She soon ran out of bullets and was left slashing left and right with her hunting knife. Eventually, they reached the town of Verkhayansk, safety at last. Shortly after this incident, Anya worked with the regional authority to put together a plan to wipe out the wolves. He authorized the formation of 24 teams of hunters and trappers, offering $250 per wolf hide. Even so, it took many months before the wolf population was under control again, and nobody knows what might happen the next time there's a bad winter. So if you happen to find yourself in the wilds of Siberia anytime soon, whatever you do, don't get lost in the woods.